I consent to being live streamed.
Yeah, perfect. It'll take about a minute. We'll wait for some viewers to attend and then we will get started.
Cool.
All right. All right, we can go ahead with the next slide. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Back to School Live series. My name is Andrea. I am a health promoter with Niagara Parents. Today, we welcome Celeste from the Niagara Falls Community Health Center. Celeste is a queer and genderqueer individual who enjoys both teaching and practicing yoga. Celeste, when I was reading up on all that you do, I didn't know where to begin with your bio. From your work with Out Niagara, your dedication to your role as the LGBTQ2+ support coordinator, your YMCA Peace Medal for your efforts to the Niagara sexual and gender diverse community, and so much more. We are so excited to have you talk to us today, but before we get started, I would like to share a few reminders. So please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box for Celeste to answer at the end. There will be a question period. This presentation will be recorded and saved on the Niagara Parents Facebook and YouTube pages in case you missed it or you'd like to watch again. If we are unable to answer any of your questions, please reach out to us via Facebook Messenger or through our live chat, phone, or email, and we can connect you with resources. And then, of course, Celeste's contact information and resources that we discussed today will be located in the chat box on the discussion page as well of the event. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Celeste.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and thank you, Niagara Parents, for having me to talk. Today, we're going to talk about the gender elephant, and I love the gender elephant. I use the gender elephant all the time. I probably owe the gender elephant like a portion of my paycheck by now. I use the gender elephant so much. So what the gender elephant is an educational tool. This is created by the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity, or CCGSD for short. And CCGSD is located in Ottawa. And their website today, or after today, if you're looking for more resources, their website has an amazing resource page. So the gender elephant's on there, and there's many other amazing resources that you can access if you want to learn more after today. So the gender elephant is an educational tool. You may have heard of like the genderbread person, the gender unicorn. This is another adaptation of that. It's CCGSD's take on that. The gender elephant is going to help us understand some concepts and terms that we're going to go through today, and those are gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, physical attraction, and romantic attraction. I, as part of my job at the Niagara Falls Community Health Center, is giving sexual and gender diversity educational trainings and presentations. And often folks are like, can you go over all the terms? I want to know what all the words mean. I want to know the definitions. And I actually tend to stray away from that, I don't put a lot of emphasis on what very specific terms mean for a couple of reasons. One reason is that some folks find them very empowering, and that's great. And for other folks, they don't really fit. Humans are very complex, and we don't all necessarily fit into a perfect textbook definition of what a word might mean. Another reason I don't focus on them is that, like I said, humans are complex. And so even if we were like, yeah, we want to use this, I want to use this term for myself, and this is how I identify, everyone has the right to define that differently for themselves a little bit, right? So again, we're more complex than just a perfect textbook definition. If we wanted to ask 100 non-binary people, how they define non-binary, you'll get 100 similar, but a little bit different answers. And so again, is why I don't focus specifically on terms. And another big piece of that is that, so all of us have the right to define what terms we use for ourselves, to have words that we're like, yes, this describes me, this is empowering, this is affirming, this is how I feel. We have the right to do that for ourselves, but we don't have the right to do that for others. And so it's never, ever my job or your job to do essentially what I call like the gender sexuality math, right? It's never our job to be like, okay, so you're dating this person, but you used to date this person. So does that make you, like, we don't have to do that for people, which again is why I don't focus on terms. What is more important, if you really are interested in the terms, is that if you meet someone who says to you that, they might disclose to you a term that they use, rather than being like, okay, cool, and then Googling it behind their back and thinking you might know what it means, have that conversation with that person. If you're on that level with them, to say, I've actually never heard that term before. Would you mind explaining it to me, or would you mind telling me how you define that? And that is a much better understanding of each other as humans than any real textbook glossary is ever going to be able to provide us. So all that being said, that's why I don't focus on specific terms like the terms that are in the acronym, for example. I focus on these ones instead. So this is the gender elephant as a whole. So if I were to hand you this tool on a piece of paper, this is what the whole thing looks like. So on the left, we have our friend the elephant with these icons all over them. And on the right, we have kind of the legend of what all of those things are. And we're going to go through and break them all down one by one. What I want you to notice before I move on is that for almost every term underneath, there's 3 arrows. And on the arrows, they have circles. And I want you to imagine that those circles are like volume knobs or like percent meters, and are totally slidable, changeable, fluid. There's no rules about them. So it's not like one goes up, so one has to go down. It's not like it was this way, so it has to be that way forever. All of them can be totally fluid and change, and that's okay. And so the arrows that we have, the lines that we have on them, we have roughly, or on most of them, right? It says female, woman, girl, male, man, boy. Then we have additional genders. That's my only constructive criticism of the gender elephant, is that I don't like the word other, but other genders or genders outside of the gender binary really is what that's getting to. The only term that arrow with the slider doesn't have is sex assigned at birth. And we're going to talk more about that, but I'll just tell you quickly the reason that is because that was a stamp in time, right? So that's not something that's ongoingly changing. That was assigned at birth. That was a stamp in time, a moment in time, and that's why that one doesn't have that fluid flexibility like the others do. So the first piece of the gender elephant is gender identity. So you can see we have the little brain on the elephant's head. Gender identity defined is someone's individual experience of gender. So it's their own internal sense of whether they're a man, a woman, or another gender, a gender outside of that gender binary. And when I say gender binary, I often do this a lot. I do the air quotes. I'm not sure how Facebook Live works, so I'm not really sure if you can see me doing the air quotes, but I'm finger quoting, saying gender binary, right? That our society has created this, or has this gender binary of like, it's this or that, one or the other, right? Binary meaning two. You go to a bathroom in a public place in an older building, you go to the left or you go to the right. You walk into a clothing store, you go to the left or you go to the right. And so that's a construct created by our society. And that's what I mean when I say gender binary, and that there are other genders outside of the binary of just male and female. So gender identity is someone's internal sense of what their gender is. Often, someone's gender identity corresponds with what was their sex as assigned at birth, which we call cisgender, but sometimes it doesn't, and that's transgender. So I'll give you an example. So if we have a baby that's born, and that baby, whoever delivers the baby is like, congratulations, it's us, and they say girl. So that baby was assigned female at birth. If that baby grows into a girl and eventually a woman, and that's also that person's gender identity, and they're happy about that, that's genuinely their gender identity, then that person is cisgender. And so if someone, let's use that same example, a baby is born, doctor says, congratulations, it's a girl, and that baby grows up and their gender identity is anything other than female, whether it's male, whether it's non-binary, gender fluid, any gender other than female, then that's considered transgender. And that's what defines transgender. There's no like levels of validity of being trans. There's no like having to have had like the surgery. Don't ever ask someone if they've had the surgery. There's no other levels of trans validity. That's what defines transgender, is that someone's gender identity is not the same as what they were assigned at birth. Gender identity is internal and not visible to others. It's one of two aspects that makes up gender as a whole, and we'll talk about the second one in a moment. But I really want to hone in on this first point, that gender identity is internal. It's not necessarily visible to others, right? So it doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what you sound like, doesn't matter what you were assigned at birth. I explain this as like, you could be in a room with your eyes closed in a dark room and nobody else has to see you, and like, but you still know that that's your gender identity. Whatever your gender is, if you're not someone who's questioning your gender right now, if I said, hey, what's your gender? And you're like, you just know, if you know your gender, that's your gender identity. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with anything else. You know that for yourself. It's a really strong internal sense of knowing yourself, and it's your own individual experience of gender. One piece before we get to the second aspect of gender that I wanted to address is that third line, right? So I'm like, there are genders outside of the gender binary that's created by society. So this is the trans umbrella, both literally and figuratively. And so these are terms that fall under the umbrella of transgender. On the left, we have ones that fit society's gender binary. We have trans men and trans women. Trans men were likely assigned female at birth, and trans women were likely assigned male at birth. And we're going to talk more about sex assigned at birth in a couple of slides. And then we have gender identities that are non-binary, meaning literally just that. They don't fit the binary, non-binary. Some folks use that as their gender identity term on its own. And then there are even more gender identities underneath the umbrella of non-binary. Just to give you some insight into what that third line is really addressing. So the next piece of gender is gender expression. And something I want to point out right away is that on our lines, the arrows, the words changed, right? A second ago, we had female, man, girl, male, man, boy. Now we have masculine and feminine. And these are really stereotypes, and we'll talk more about that. So gender expression is how a person outwardly expresses their gender identity, right? So gender identity is internal, it's not visible. Gender expression is external. So this is how someone takes their gender identity and like shows it out to the world, to show folks who you are. So this can be through behavior, through clothing, through hairstyles, voice, body modifications, etc. Someone's gender expression may not always be stereotypically congruent with their gender identity, but that doesn't invalidate their gender identity. And a really, really important word here again is stereotype, stereotypically. So let's use an example and say, if someone's gender identity is male, that person's gender is male, and then that person decides that they want to wear a dress. Society, right? Society and stereotypes would be like, that's feminine, but that doesn't invalidate that that person's gender identity is male, if that's still what their gender identity is, right? So just really important to understand that we can't make assumptions about someone's gender identity by looking at them. And it's really not even our job to do that, but we can't make assumptions about folks' gender identity just by how they dress or what they look like or what they sound like, etc. Yeah. Another piece that's important to understand about stereotypes is that they're exactly that, they're stereotypes, and that they vary. So they vary throughout history. What we've considered quote unquote masculine and feminine 100 years ago versus today is different versus in the future is going to be different. I really just hope we don't even have those words anymore. And not only through time, but also through different cultures. So in different cultures around the world, they might have terms like masculine, feminine, and 3 other terms. They might not even have any. They might have entirely different ones from masculine and feminine. So just really important to understand that when we're talking about stereotypes and what's masculine and what's feminine, very specifically like Niagara, Ontario, Canada, September, I almost said August, September 2021, right? So that all of these things can change. The next piece we're going to talk about is sex assigned at birth. So, oh, you know what I missed telling you? So in the last one, we talked about gender expression. We had the green circles. And so you can see the green circles are kind of like all around the elephant, like around the elephant's gender expression. So now we're on sex assigned at birth, and we have the little leaf, and it's over the elephant's groin area. And so we've already started talking about this because it kind of comes up as it's a little interweaved with the other concepts. So sex assigned at birth is that a baby is born, whatever medical professional delivers the baby, looks between their legs and makes the call, right? Congratulations, it's a boy or girl, gets wrapped in a pink or blue blankie, and like so much of that baby's life is already set out and decided. That's what sex assigned at birth is. And so female and male, I think folks understand that quite simply, and that typically I don't need to explain any further. What is important to talk about is intersex. So intersex is a term used to describe people who are born with anatomy or chromosome patterns that don't fit and I'm really going to hardcore air quote this and say typical definitions of male or female. So anatomy can be really visually obvious. A baby could be born with genitals that are both, quote unquote female and male typically. And it can be not visually obvious. A baby could be born with something externally and something internally. It may or may not know about that until way later in life. And then chromosome patterns can even have variances that equal someone being intersex. What's unfortunate and why it's important that we talk about this is that intersex folks are often subject to surgical intervention at birth with or without consent from their parents or even parentals, even their parents having knowledge that that's happened. And so this is unfortunate for a bunch of reasons. One is that we know babies can't consent, right? And so maybe we would think, okay, well, at least the parents, they would be the next best person. But sometimes this is even done without the parents' knowledge or consent. Another reason it's unfortunate is that there's nothing harmful about being intersex. There's nothing wrong with being intersex. Humans are so ironic because like we celebrate diversity in nature all the time. We love diversity in nature. We think it's so cool. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, you see photos shared of like really cool things that are like a little bit different in nature, right? An example I use all the time is like a picture of a cat where one half of their face is black and the other half is orange. Like we love that kind of diversity in nature. And then that diversity happens in humans. And unfortunately, there are some folks who think, and think that something needs to be quote unquote fixed when really it doesn't. We're humans, we're part of nature, and we're so diverse and complex and beautiful. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But what's wrong with that is when we don't think it's okay. And so another reason that this is harmful is that intersex folks may or may not have chosen to have that surgical intervention for themselves. There's nothing harmful and wrong with being intersex, but there can literally physically be physical complications from having that surgical intervention done, and then even emotionally can be harmful as well, right? That person may or may not have chosen that for themselves or not wanted that to have happened. So that's why it's so important to talk about intersex, to make sure that there's more intersex awareness, and that folks, there's a big movement to have these surgical interventions stopped. Another thing that's important to note about intersex is that the occurrence of folks who are born intersex is 1.7% of the population, which sounds like not a big number, but when you consider like the population of the world, how many billions of people, that's a lot of people. It's a lot of folks that are intersex. And it actually is roughly the same number of occurrence of folks who are born natural born redheads. So the population that's born natural born redheads is 1 to 2%, and intersex is 1.7. So that's how common being born intersex is. If you want to learn more, you can go to intersexequality.org, and that's where that statistic is from. So the last two pieces of the gender elephant are physical attraction and emotional attraction. So physical attraction, you also hear this called sexual orientation. And you'll see that we're back to our sliders, right? We have men, we have women, we have additional genders. And there's not really any rules about this, that who we're physically attracted to can be fluid. It can change, it cannot. It doesn't have to be like 0% and 100%. Like it can all be all over, and that's fine. Sexual orientation is defined as a term used to describe the direction of a person's physical attraction. It's not a set of absolute categories, but ironically, right, this is where a lot of terms are derived from. A lot of the terms that we hear, gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, etc., are sexual orientations. Oops, I went too fast. One thing that, again, this is why I don't focus a lot on terms, on like what specific terms and labels mean. Who someone is physically attracted to is a huge part of who someone is, or it certainly can be. But again, it's only one part, right? So again, this is why I focus on these other terms in a more broad way, and hope that that helps understand some of the smaller terms when it's appropriate to do so. So this is physical attraction, and the next piece is emotional attraction. And when I explain the difference to kids, so emotional attraction is also called romantic orientation. So a term used to describe the direction of a person's romantic or emotional attraction. And physical was the direction of physical attraction, right? So when I explain this to kids, I often say physical attraction is who you might feel like you want to like kiss and make out with, like who you're physically attracted to. And often kids are like, ew, and they don't really want to hear about that. But then emotional attraction, I explain as this is who you might want to like hold hands with or go on a walk on the beach with, like it's romantic. And kids are like, oh, and they get it. And that's really important to understand, is that a lot of times the questions that I get are like, well, how young can kids know who they're attracted to? Or how young can they know their gender? Or how young can they know, or how can my kid even know that they are gay if they don't even know what sex is? And they very well might not know who they're sexually or physically attracted to, but they certainly can know who they're emotionally attracted to very young. If you're someone who experiences emotional attraction or romantic attraction, if you can think back to the first time that was, you probably were very young, right? And so kids have an awareness of this very young. So emotional attraction is who someone is attracted to romantic or emotionally, and physical attraction is who someone is physically attracted to. Again, not a set of absolute categories, and this may or may not coincide with someone's sexual orientation. So who somebody can be attracted to physically and who somebody can be attracted to emotionally can be different. It doesn't have to be the same. I'll give you an example. So I have a friend who her sexual orientation is that she's bisexual. And she defines that as I'm physically attracted to men and women. But emotionally, as far as relationships goes, she's only ever been in relationships with women. She's only interested in relationships with women. And so that's how those two things can exist separately from each other. They don't have to be the same. And I often honestly give these presentations and folks reach out after and they're like, that makes so much sense. You have no idea. Or if you've ever questioned, like, I think I have feelings for this person, but I don't necessarily feel like I want to do that with them, or whatever the case, like it's complex, and we're all entirely valid in that these two things can exist separately. And even then, not only can they exist separately, but then they can exist fluidly, right? And there's a lot of emphasis in society to focus on what our sexual orientation is or who we're physically attracted to. There's not a lot of emphasis on emotional or romantic attraction, and that those two things can even be different from each other. So that's the gender elephant. Yay. But it's a really like just opening the door of a world of so much more information. That being said, I'm back on Monday to talk about pronouns. And so I talked a lot about how like it's not our job to figure out people's gender identity. It's not our job to know someone's orientation. But on Monday, when we talk about pronouns, you're going to understand more about how to address people properly, and that's what's really important. So if you are available Monday, then please do come back. I think Andrea might have some questions, but I'll throw this up. So this is my contact information for my role at the Niagara Falls Community Health Center. If you want to discuss more, if you have questions, by all means, I'm happy to do that. I don't have a fancy referral process. However, you want to get in touch with me, whether it's calling, texting, emailing, that's totally fine. And the Niagara Falls Community Health Center, we are on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to give us a follow as well, then you're welcome to do that. But yeah, I'll pass it back to Andrea.
Thank you so much. We did have a few questions come in. Some of these were submitted prior. So obviously, cool. If anyone ever has questions and would like to submit them anonymously, Niagara Parents is welcoming any questions anonymously as well through our chat box. So please do that as well. Celeste's contact information will all be in the discussion page, as I mentioned, and here. So take a screenshot or whatever it is, so you have all this contact information ready. All right, we got a question asking, so my child came home from school and let me know about attraction to someone of the same gender. How can I support their feelings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's important is that validation, right? And that they could be feeling that, and what message do you want them to hear from you about it, right? And often I like to phrase this as like, what's more harmful potentially, right? To say to your kid like, oh, great, are they nice? Tell me about them, right? And to just have that conversation, and that's totally normal and fine. And there are lots of folks who experience emotional attraction to people of the same gender, right? Like, great, there's nothing wrong with that. Do you want to have that conversation, or do you want to have the harmful conversation of, not in my house, you're too young, you can't know that, and not saying to your kid like, I reject this part of you? And that's extremely harmful, right? And so I would recommend the former over the latter. And you know, if you're struggling with that conversation, then again, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to navigate that with you folks.
Love it. Yes, absolutely. If anyone has questions or would just like to know how to even approach these conversations with their children, they're important conversations and there's a lot to learn. So Celeste is more than willing to have these conversations with you and give you some tips and tricks and guide you along the way. So I highly encourage you all to reach out to Celeste. Another question that came in is in regards to the difference between gender identity and then gender expression.
Yeah, so let me pop back a bunch of slides. So gender identity, what's really important to understand, I'm gonna get a hand cramp, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, gender identity is what someone's own experience is of their gender, right? So that person just knows that that's their gender, whether that's something that fits the binary or not. And that's for them to know. It's like a strong sense of knowing. Like the first time somebody handed you a pencil or a crayon and you just knew what hand to grab it with, like you just know, there's no other way to put it. That's gender identity. I shouldn't say you just know, because that's complicated in the sense that we live in a cis heteronormative society, right? Where everyone is assumed to be cisgender and heterosexual or straight until proven otherwise. And so sometimes it's more complicated than saying you just know, because you've been perhaps railroaded into a certain gender identity for a long time. And then at some point you're like, this doesn't fit. And that's what we call gender dysphoria, right? Very vaguely put. And then as folks explore their gender identity, then hopefully at some point they land upon something, right? That's like, yes, like I said, you just knew what, and you're like,
that
this is
gut
what's right
feeling.
For me. Totally, yeah, this is what's right for me. And it doesn't have to be this rigid, like, oh, it was this one. Like there's also like gender fluid, and gender identity can be fluid, and that's totally valid as well. So that's gender identity. We don't know someone's gender identity by looking at them, by hearing them, by anything else, by what they were assigned at birth. None of those things define gender identity except for that person. That person defines their gender identity for themselves. So what's in gender identity is very internal, right? And then gender expression is external. So gender expression, like if we wanted to pick apart this elephant's gender expression. And again, it's external, and unfortunately, really is kind of rooted in or judged on stereotypes, right? So in our society, we use terms like masculine and feminine. And so if we wanted to pick apart the elephant's gender expression, we might say, well, the elephant's wearing a tuxedo, so our society says that's like masculine, but the elephant is pink, and so is that feminine, just for example, right? So gender expression is how folks express their gender out, essentially. That's the difference. I hope that made sense. Okay.
Awesome. So I'm thinking in terms of gender expression and gender identity, we have a question here asking about how to have these conversations with either your child or their classmates. So I'm assuming that this question is more so shaped around the child's a little bit confused about the expression of a classmate or themselves. So how can a parent really approach this in a really good way with their child?
Sure. Yep. And I think similar to the last question about how do I talk to my kid about same gender attraction, is really being mindful of what's harmful and not going down that road. And so talking to, your kids, I work with youth very young. And so your children very likely are exposed to kids who are gender diverse, and just having, it's really can be very simple, right? It seems very complicated, but like I said, there's not a ton of rules to any of this. And so that conversation can be quite simple about like, well, that's how that youth feels happiest, right? That's who that kid is, and how great of, us to support them in that, right? And that there's nothing wrong with that. And that sometimes, I don't know how to make this sound like kid digestible, right? But like, sometimes kids are born a certain way, and then we all think that they're going to like these things, but then they tell us they don't like these things, they like these things. And it's really great for us to be able to support them in that, and to just make sure that they're happy. Just like you're happy when you wear your whatever favorite shirt, they're happy in this favorite thing, right? And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And same with like, if I started calling you a name that wasn't your name, you might not like it. But then if we found your name that you do like, you're like, yeah, that's my name, thanks, right? Like it's just what fits, and supporting youth in that.
And kids are so resilient. Like they will, whatever you're telling them, they, at the end of the day, they want their classmates to be happy and excited. So if you're telling their classmates happy and excited, they're like, okay, mom, they're happy and excited.
Absolutely. I've given presentations to a bunch of classrooms, and kids are like accepting until they're taught not to be, really, right? And so I'll give you an example. Like the one classroom, we had a youth who is trans and wanted to have like a meeting to like quote unquote come out, or to share this information with their classmates. And so, it was like your friend was this name, on Friday, but it's Monday, and now we use this name and these pronouns, and that's what it is going forward. Okay. And the kids were like, what happens when a substitute teacher comes? Do we tell the substitute teacher, or is the teacher going to tell the substitute teacher? Because we want to make sure the substitute teacher, like, they were like, okay, great, yay for my friend, but how do I protect them? Like it was so cute. They just had the best intentions. It was so kind. Kids are awesome.
All right. So our final question is kind of, you touched on this a little bit, but when talking about the gender elephant, is preschool too soon?
I don't think so. Like I said, it can be really simplified. Even I tried to keep things simple today, and I think it could get even more simple. I don't think it's ever too soon, right? Like, again, it's coming down to teaching our children that we love and accept them, right? And getting away from this, like, you're too young, or you don't know, or not in my house, or whatever the harmful dialect is, we want to remove, right? And so all of these can be made very, very simple. I've done it, not for today's video, but I've had these conversations with kids, and they're very open to understanding. And no, I don't think it's ever too young. I know kids very young who probably could have super benefited from this like a year or two ago when they were in kindergarten, right? So no, I don't think it's ever too young. And it can be really simple and made very simple for kids to understand.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again for joining us. The resources that were mentioned in today's presentation are linked in the comment section. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to either Niagara Parents via Facebook Messenger, live chat, or phone, or Celeste contact information will also be in that discussion page of the event. And I hope you took a screenshot as well. Please feel free to reach out to Celeste whenever. A reminder that we have more exciting back to school Facebook Live events coming up during the month of September. And our next one will also be with Celeste. So be sure to tune in on Monday, September 13th at 2 p.m. for our pronoun chat. Thank you once again, and we wish you and your family all the best this new school year. All right,
so much.
bye everyone.
Bye.